Everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist platform that Angela Walker, my running mate, and I ran on. So now it's 2024, and we're trying to get back on the ballot. It was tough when I ran because of COVID and the lockdowns. And you go try to get a signature, and people run away from you because they don't want to get COVID. It was really tough. This year we don't have that obstacle, but we have, ridiculous obstacles like my state of New York. We got to get 45,000 signatures in 42 days. That's the hardest petition in the United States. And as far as I know, it's the hardest in the world. I joke with state legislators when I lobby them to write a fair ballot access bill. See, what happened is in 2020, during the COVID lockdown, Andrew Cuomo, who was mad at me for getting 5% running against him for governor in 2014, saw his chance to knock us off the ballot. And they attached to the budget bill, which has to pass, a bill that tripled the number of votes we needed, at least, to stay on the ballot, which we failed in 2020 and lost our ballot line, tripled the number of signatures we need to get back on the ballot, quintupled the number of signatures we need in half the congressional districts in that statewide petition of 45,000, from 100 to 500 signatures per congressional district, and doubled the frequency we have to qualify, from every 4 years in the governor's race to every 2 years for governor or president. And it succeeded in knocking off all the parties that ran their own candidates, like the Greens and the Libertarians. And it left 4 ballot lines, but only 2 candidates. The 2 other ballot lines are Working Families Party, which endorses the Democrat, and the Conservatives, which endorses the Republican. So in 2022, for the first time since 1946, there were only the Democratic and Republican candidates on the ballot for governor. And for all the statewide offices, it was the first time that only Democrats and Republicans were on the ballot. Since the secret ballot, and the state authorized ballot was introduced in 1891. So they really wiped out alternatives. So we're out there doing our best. I was out there this morning at a farmer's market, and I think I mentioned last week, they put me in the flea market shed at the regional market, which is a Trumpier crowd. So I was averaging 100 the 2 weeks I was out there. Today I was in a produce shed, which I've been begging them to put me in, and I got 170. So it really made a difference. The flea market was a, more Trumpy type crowd. And, for those of you that may be petitioning, I don't think you need to say a lot. The key is to ask as many people as possible. So my pitch is, can you help us out? Sometimes, can you help me out? With a signature to put the Green Party back on the ballot in New York. And then you get a yes or a no. It's short, and you usually don't need to say more than that. And when I ask them to help us, it's like, well, how can they say no without being, a little bit impolite when they can help? And put us back on the ballot. A lot of people don't realize the Greens were knocked off the ballot. So that'll stop people in their tracks. What? The Greens aren't on the ballot? Or some will argue with me, they're on the ballot. I've seen them. So that's a little longer conversation. So that brief pitch can help us out with a signature to put the Green Party back on the ballot. And, if you're out there petitioning, that's what I recommend. I mean, you can come up with your own wording, but it's basically asking them, getting a yes or no. If it's a yes, get the signature. If it's a no, ask the next person you see. So what I find is, many people, including old school Republicans, not the neo-fascist new Republicans, they say, yeah, we want more choices on the ballot. They just support that in principle, even if they're not Green Party supporters. The people that resist are some Democrats who are pretty open about it, meaning, no, we don't want the Green Party on the ballot. You're competition. Or they'll say we're going to spoil the presidential election, which is absurd in New York. Biden beat Trump by 22 points in 2020, and Trump is probably losing ground in New York. it's just not realistic. And if he did win New York, he'd swept the whole country. So, but that position is very anti-democratic, and some of these Democrats are even proud that they are limiting the options of the voters, which is, an anti-small d democratic position. And then, the Republican right wingers usually say no. When I'm asked, well, what is the Green Party? Because not everybody knows. My brief response is, well, we stand for environmental protection, economic justice, and fair elections. And the Republicans, like economic justice, they don't like that. I mean, I really, that's when they walk away. And then there's this thing I mentioned last week. They really have it out for electric vehicles. It must be a thing they're promoting on right-wing social media, Fox, Newsmax, etc. I can see that it's anti-Biden messaging because EVs are about all Biden's got when he's talking about what he's done for the climate. So it makes sense that Trumpies are attacking that. But the Greens seem to be a little bit of collateral damage on that messaging aimed at Biden. So anyway, I got 170 so far, and there's a crawfish fry downtown that's going on right now. So when the podcast is over, I'm going to go down there and get well over 200 for the day. So those of you petitioning, I'm just trying to encourage you to get out there. And those of you that aren't, but there's a petition in your state, please help these petitions. Because if we're not on the ballot, we're not in the conversation. And while it's a long shot to win, these top of the ballot kind of races, we do change the debate. We do put issues on the table. Who would be talking about the Green New Deal now if it wasn't for the Green Party? In 2010, we started running on that, and it was picked up by people. By the end of that campaign, we had a national statement of something like 70 Green candidates demanding a Green New Deal from the federal government to get to 100% clean energy and zero greenhouse gas emissions in a decade, along with an economic bill of rights so that everybody had the right to a job, income above poverty, health care, affordable housing, a lifelong tuition-free public education from childcare through graduate school, and a secure retirement by increasing Social Security benefits. And then Jill Stein, that was the theme of her first two campaigns in 2012 and 2016. And of a lot of Green candidates down ballot, including me when I ran for governor 2 more times, and some other races I ran for local Green New Deals, it was our signature issue. And we know that AOC, who brought it to Sunrise in that sit-in with Pelosi, where the Green New Deal went viral in the media, she got it from her campaign manager, VG Ramos, who had managed the Green Party campaign for city council for Jabari Brisport the year before. So we know where the Greens got it. Unfortunately, they've watered it down. That non-binding resolution, which has never got a vote in the House, did get a vote in the Senate, and all the Democrats abstained because they said McConnell was trying to trick them into getting on the record on the Green New Deal in an election year. Well, hell, if you're for it, you're for it. Vote for it. But they didn't. And the substance of it really watered down what the Green Party had been talking about for the previous decade. It eliminated our demand for a ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. It eliminated our call for a phase out of nuclear power as renewables are phased in. It eliminated our call for deep cuts in military spending to help fund a Green New Deal. It extended the deadline for when we should get to zero emissions from 2030 at that time, a decade later, to 30 years, 2050. And it changed the definition of zero from real zero to net zero, which is a way of saying, well, we can still burn fossil fuels if we do carbon capture and sequestration, which is a very expensive, unproven technology. And I won't go into the details, but we've had a disaster in Mississippi because of a carbon dioxide pipeline. If carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so it's on the ground, it can asphyxiate people. So there are a lot of problems with that. And it also allows continued burning of fossil fuels, which is what we got to stop to save the climate. So that's the Democrats' Green New Deal. The Greens need to, I think, keep ownership of that and put the real teeth and content back into it. So anyway, that's why we should be out there petitioning, because we do change the debate, even if we don't win the office. I'll give you another example. Here in my congressional district, they always say we spoil elections. So we split the vote. So the Democrats lose to the Republicans. But in this district I'm living in, for the last 50 years and more, there's only 2 times a Republican got beat by a Democrat. And that's when a Green ran. And instead of splitting the vote, we changed the debate. And the Democrat had to respond to what we were saying and had to, sound somewhat like us. And that mobilized and energized the Democratic base. So we did that in 2008 and 2012. And those are the only 2 times the Democrat has won. And it's hard to believe, but we're a purple district, voted, for Biden by, by at least 10 or 15 points. It's upstate, so you do have rural conservative Republican areas. But they can't win the congressional district because they don't offer voters anything. They run centrist Democrats who lean to the right, thinking they can take the left for granted. The base of the Democratic Party just shrugs, what's this Democrat got to, going to do for us? They stay home. And so now we have a MAGA Republican who doesn't even live in the district. And he's a transplant from Texas. And he should be easy to beat. And man, if they don't beat him this year, I'm going to really try hard to get a Green to run in the next race, because shoot, we could win. The Democrats have been so ineffectual in this district. So that's all to say, get out there, petition, get our candidates on the ballot, and then we can move the debate. And that's half the battle. And of course, as I've been arguing since 2020, we really got to prioritize ranked choice voting to end the spoiler problem, and proportional representation to end gerrymandering, but also to give the Greens our fair and proportional share of representation in government. And once we're there, it'll legitimize us, give us a permanent platform, and getting the issue debated is half the battle. We can win the debate because the people are with us. When you look at the polling numbers on things like Medicare for all, taxing the rich, a Green New Deal, and so forth. So anyway, let's go out there and petition. And some people, it is kind of tedious to keep asking the same thing over and over and over to strangers for the most part. But it's for a righteous cause. I think that's the way you need to look at it. Like, you're going out there and doing what needs to be done, and we've got to really put the energy into this stuff, because just look at the Trumpies. They're out there in 2020 doing motorcades. They were knocking door to door even during the COVID lockdown. And the Biden campaign was relying on campaign ads. Now, in the popular vote, they won, but it was really close in the electoral college vote, when they should have just crushed, Trump, because he's crazy. And most people understand that. So let's go out and petition. The other thing I want to say a few words about before we get to questions and comments is Gaza. It's still top of the headlines, and what's going on in Gaza, thanks to the Israeli assault, is, genocide. It really is. And it's, massacring people. People are starving. They don't have medicine. They're sick. It's just one of the cruelest things imaginable that I've ever seen. A ceasefire deal is on the table that the, people like, the U.S. and Qatar and Egypt, are all for. And, but Hamas won't agree to it because it's a temporary ceasefire. They want a permanent ceasefire. And Israel wants the war to continue indefinitely. So while they negotiate, they really aren't negotiating seriously. And Netanyahu's still saying he's going to invade Rafah, whether there's a truce or not. In other words, he's saying he will violate the truce. And the conclusion to draw is he is not to be trusted. And, the fact that Biden is still not, publicly really condemning this guy. He's kind of, whining on the sidelines. But this is totally Genocide Joe's war. You get reports every morning in his briefings on the number of deaths in Gaza. as well as the West Bank, where, under the cover of the war on Gaza, the settlers, backed by the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, is stealing more and more Palestinian lands. And, there's about 500 Palestinians have died since October 7th in the West Bank because of settler and IDF violence. Yet Biden continues to send arms to Israel. Israel would have run out of artillery and tank shells by now if the U.S. wasn't constantly replenishing them and actually taking those shells that should have gone to Ukraine. But now there's a shortage of shells, and Ukraine is short of shells to defend itself against the Russian invasion. So, the U.S. is a total partner in what Israel's doing in Gaza. We have to realize that. And, I think one of Jill Stein's strength as a candidate is that she recognizes that. And as you probably all know, she got arrested and charged with assault at a Palestinian Solidarity encampment at Washington University in St. Louis last Saturday night. If you've seen the videos, she didn't assault anybody. The police assaulted her by shoving a bicycle in her face. And she took some bruises, but maybe it was worth it for the campaign because she's got more media interviews in the last week than any week of the campaign so far. So, all of us should, be out there. Right now, it's the college encampments where a lot of this activity is going on. And I have to say the college administrations are only fueling the movement by their repression. And I want to call out UCLA for stupidity and callousness. If you saw these videos, I think it was Wednesday night, thugs from right-wing Jewish groups in LA, which has a history going back to Meyer Kiani and the Jewish Defense League in the 70s. They attacked that campus encampment, which was nonviolent. And for 5 hours, they were trying to tear it down, as vandals, shooting fireworks into it, and then engaging in personal assaults with fists and kicks and clubs of people in the encampment and even media that was filming what these thugs were doing. And the police just looked on for 5 hours from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. Actually, the small campus security withdrew, and the LAPD showed up, like 1 or 2 in the morning and watched for another hour or two before they finally tried to break up the mayhem. And then the administration turns around and uses those assaults by racist vandals and thugs to shut down the encampment that was protesting racist violence against the Palestinians by Israel's war in Gaza. And I have to say the mass media are stirring up these tensions too. They are highlighting what are isolated and uncharacteristic anti-Semitic statements within the movement. Those do exist. We had an incident up here at Syracuse. But then they're interpreting Palestinian solidarity as inherently anti-Semitic. And, one of them is Morning Joe. What's his last name? Morning Joe on MSNBC. And every time I turn that on in the morning, he's on a rant about how anti-Semitic these protests are. And he's just totally wrong about their position and their policies. And, they're doing that while they're downplaying the attacks on students and professors in the form of suspensions and expulsions of Palestinian solidarity for Palestinian solidarity statements by students and professors. And, the mass media is not given, the spin on it is really distorting. So I was at the encampment at Syracuse University on Wednesday. It's about 40 people. I got there at 5 p.m. And this has been my experience with Syracuse University. They're kind of suspicious of community people, outsiders. And the encampment issued a call for people, outsiders to come in. So I came in, I had my Jill Stein petition, and, I'm talking to students in the encampment and getting signatures. And then one student creates a commotion by telling another student, don't sign, don't give them your name, you don't know where it's going. And I said, well, it's going to the Board of Election just to, identify the signature with, the address which the voter is registered at. And he made it like I was a cop, and going to give it to the Syracuse administration. And that was bullshit. And I told him that. I didn't know that there had been a counter demonstration by Jewish groups at Syracuse and in the community that had marched the encampment about 4 hours earlier. And they kept their distance from the encampment and, did some chants and prayers and whatnot. And then they were only there for about an hour. And it didn't seem to have raised tension when I was there. Nobody mentioned it when I was talking to people. But, generally, my experience with these students is my general experience has been with Syracuse University as a community person. It's kind of a snooty place that's disrespectful to community people like me. And I was disappointed that the encampment students were no different. I mean, I was told once the commotion started by a woman who came up and said, well, we have a rule that outsiders. I said, I'm not an outsider. I'm here in solidarity. And she said, no, outsiders got to stand by the media tent, which was on the edge of the encampment. Nobody was there. She said, I got to wait for people to come to me, which that's when I said, this is bullshit. I'd get the same runaround if I was dealing with the Syracuse University administration, trying to find a reasonable place to petition on campus. So they're kind of wrapped up in their insular campus world. Still, I wish them good luck and smart strategies because I think they're going to need them because they are right in the way of the graduation ceremonies on May 12th. So between now and then, I expect the cops are going to come in to remove them, and I hope they handle it in a smart way and they get a lot of support. But that's just one of many, many encampments. And, another issue this has raised besides what's the slaughter that's going on in Gaza is the issue of freedom of speech and assembly, particularly on universities, which are supposed to be open, places of inquiry. But the universities are suppressing them in the name of order. And I think the administrators are being cowed by pro-Israeli politicians and big donors who, want to support Israel's war on Gaza. And, Congress just passed a resolution this week that calls pro-Palestinian speech and demonstrations anti-Semitic by definition. And it had the support of most Democrats as well as Republicans. And more legislation along that lines is on the way. And so defending our democratic rights is really an important issue now. And I think we've got to be on that. And I would say the people are, again, way ahead of the politicians on the Gaza issue. When the Israeli military aid bill was voted on a couple of weeks ago, only 37 of the 435, well, let me take that back. Only 37 Democrats of the 435 members of the House voted against the Israeli military aid package. I think there might have been a few Republicans, but I'm not sure. In any case, that's less than 10% of the House, which shows we have a long way to go to break the U.S. government's Israel can do no wrong partnership, including they can do genocide, and we're going to back them. So a Gallup poll that was released on March 27 showed that Americans disapprove of the Israelis' military response in Gaza by a 55 to 35% margin. So I mean, the people are ahead of the politicians. So we have to keep the pressure up for a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and end the military aid to Israel until it dismantles its apartheid policies, ends the occupations of the Palestinian territories, and begins genuine engagement in negotiations with the Palestinians for a political solution to this conflict. And all sides in Israeli politics, Palestinian politics, and the international community say the U.S., as Israel's most important ally, must use its leverage to make those changes happen, which puts an awesome responsibility on us to change our government's policies as it regards Israel and Palestine. So we have our work cut out for us, and we need to keep pushing because what's happening now in Gaza is, just devastating, hard to watch, crimes against humanity, and we just can't stand by as spectators. We got to act on it. So I'm gonna stop there and let's see your questions and comments. Trey Woodford, another burning question. How can we talk sense to Democrats and VBNMW? You're going to have to tell me what that stands for. When their hatred and fear of Trump is so all-consuming that they are willing to support genocide and war crimes abroad and blue fascism, i.e. democratic fascism as a whole, as a result. Well, I think we need to the sense we can get into a real dialogue, point out that, Greens change the debate even if we don't win the office in our current electoral system, as I was talking about at the top. And, I here can give the example of, well, wait a minute. The only time we got a Democrat elected is when the Green ran, because we changed the debate. I think, I had a few conversations petitioning today that, got to that level with Democrats that were hesitant to sign. And, I think it was pretty persuasive. VBN, I'm not sure what that stands for. So I don't have my comments up here yet. Let's see. Oh, blue, vote blue no matter who. Okay. Yeah, I think, patiently explain, give them examples. And the talk is basically, we move politics in a progressive direction, even if we don't win the office, just by being in the campaign. To the extent the media covers us and we can get informal debates, that just raises our profile. But even if we don't, we can be out there on the street raising our issues and forcing the major party candidates to deal with our positions and make the Democrats, this is where we have leverage. I had argument or discussion with one woman today who was saying there are other ways than running for office. And I said, yeah, we can have demonstrations, we can lobby, but the Democrats don't feel any pressure from us unless we're competing for votes. Otherwise, they can take their left for granted and move to the right, seeking a broader coalition, which I would argue, and this is what's happened in my congressional district, is actually the way the Democrats lose a lot of elections. Because you got to give people a reason to vote for you. And if all you're saying is, I'm not as far right as my opponent, a lot of more progressive-minded Democrats are going to say, to hell with it. I'm out of here. I'm not voting. And that happens. So I think, explain the leverage we have and the fact that we changed the debate. And, the progressive Democrats need us because, somebody like, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, if we're not out there competing for votes on the left, they got no leverage on the inside because they can be taken for granted too by the centrist establishment Democrats. So those are some of the arguments I would give to people like that. Amy L. Sachs. Stein's rally yesterday with Sachs, no relation, was very good. Well, I'm no fan of Jeffrey Sachs. He's the guy that brought the shock doctrine to the post-Soviet societies, including Ukraine, Russia, Poland, which sent him into deep depression. And I've followed his positions on Ukraine. He's got a timeline on his website, for example, which is so damn biased. It's embarrassing. It's intellectually dishonest. This guy's a big PhD, Harvard, Columbia guy. I don't care. When he gives you a timeline, and it doesn't include, in the case of Ukraine, Russia's acceptance of Ukraine's borders when it had its independence referendum in 1991, its acceptance of Ukraine's borders in the Budapest Memorandum when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons to the Russian Federation in return for that recognition of their sovereignty. When Russia did that again with the Friendship Treaty, I think that was 1998. And then in the early 2000s, another treaty where they formalized exactly where the borders were. And Ukraine did its part and putting up the border signs on its side. Russia never did on their side. But none of that is in Sachs' timeline. It's just, and he's gone on Russian state media with forget his name, Sokolov or something like that. He's like the Tucker Carlson of evening, prime time, political affairs talk shows. And he has multiple times called for nuking Ukraine and sometimes Western Europe and even the United States. And Sachs has gone on his program at least 3 times without pushing back at all on that kind of crazy talk. So anyway, I'm not a fan of Jeffrey Sachs. I didn't see the rally. I may take a look at it. I'm kind of curious as to how it went. So I can't comment on what was said last night, but I can tell you I'm not a fan of Jeffrey Sachs. He's a old school imperialist and apologist for Russian imperialism. Old school Western imperialist who's now an apologist for Russian imperialism. I think it's sad. Scout Trooper 164, why am I not surprised about Biden just standing aside? He's a neoliberal fool who merely follows what Obama used to do. Just standing aside in regard to Gaza, well, some people say, it's really the U.S. that's, it is the power in that relationship. I mean, it's kind of an anti-Semitic trope, the Jews control everything, so they control the United States, and Biden is just a puppet of Netanyahu. I don't think that's the way it is. I mean, we're so much bigger economically, militarily, and so forth. And while we're not popular around the world, particularly given our position in this war in Gaza, we're a lot more popular than Israel is around the world, which is seen as an apartheid state in a colonial entity in a lot of the post-colonial world. So, and he is doing what Obama used to do. I'll agree with you on that. It's neoliberal economics. He has a little bit more in the form of economic stimulus and public benefits than Obama ever did, except for the original, post-2008 recession stimulus package. Obama was very fiscally conservative and socially austere. In other words, social programs didn't get much funding from Obama, and he never tried to push a program. And Obamacare was the Republican healthcare reform, public subsidies for private healthcare. He was a corporate guy through and through. You remember the Wall Street slogan 3 years into his campaign? Banks got bailed out and we got sold out. I think that summarizes, the core of the Obama administration, and Biden was right there. Now, when Biden won the primary, he did make a gesture to the Sanders people. They had those joint committees to work on program, and I think Biden co-opted them for the most part because there's been very little opposition to Biden. So now Biden's running without any demands made by the Bernie Sanders or the AOCs. They gave endorsement unconditionally early on. So Biden feels no pressure from his left within the Democratic Party. And so, Trump is worse. I'll grant people that, but Biden is terrible. We're not getting real climate policies. We still have poverty and more than just the formal poverty line. About half the people, the working class in this country, is struggling paycheck to paycheck and just a paycheck away from poverty if they lose a job. So Biden has no program to deal with that. So, yeah, I guess I'm not a fan of Biden either. Amy L. Sachs. Biden could make Israel stand down next week if he wanted to, but he's a racist who loves violence and doesn't wish to. It's hard not to draw the conclusion of your second sentence because, as I said, he knows how many people are being killed in Gaza. He gets a briefing every morning on security issues, and no doubt it's telling him How many were killed? How many were children and women and civilians? How many hospitals were smashed? How many apartment blocks were smashed? Um, he knows all that. And yet, while he publicly kind of complains about how Israel's conducting its war in Gaza, he keeps sending them arms. Actions speak louder than words. Um, and, racist, I don't know if he hates Arabs particularly, but if it's not racist in intent, it's certainly racist in consequence. So, and you're right. The U.S. has leverage over Israel. We could, if we stop giving them arms, they'd run out of the ammunition they need to keep doing this assault in Gaza. And it would also send a message to the Israeli establishment that they no longer have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want, steal all the land they want from the Palestinians, which they've been doing for decades, and doing that at an accelerating rate in the West Bank. I mean, the right-wing coalition in charge of Israel now wants to either push the Palestinians out, kill them, or just make them second-class citizens who work for the Israelis. And the U.S. is complicit in that by our policies. We need a real fundamental change in U.S. policy toward the Palestinians and the Israelis. Vicky Corden, how can we avoid voter intimidation? How do we handle vigilantes with guns at the polls and drop-off boxes for mail-in ballots, especially in red states? Poll workers are getting death threats. Yeah, well, we need to demand, and actually this was part of one of the bills that I talked about that recently. Anyway, there was money that is gone. There's a federal election administration agency that supports local administration. So they put more money into protecting poll workers and election sites. So that's one thing, and we should support that and more funding for that. And then in the states, red states in particular, which brings up the point: how did the socialist color of red end up with the Republicans? I can never get used to that. So let's call them the Republican states. We got to contest them there. And people think, well, it's hopeless. Well, not really. I mean, look at Georgia, look at North Carolina. They are now competitive states. Texas is headed that way. Black people who are more progressive are the majority or close to it in Alabama and Mississippi. So the South, is an organizing challenge. It's not a hopeless cause. And I think in those red states, we can make progress. Now in the mountain states, the plain states where the Republicans are, in charge, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Kansas, you can still contest. And they're actually, the grandparents of today's grandparents were, left wingers like the Nonpartisan League in the Dakotas. So I'm just saying, just because you're in a red state, don't accept what the Republicans are doing and fight back, build an alternative, get organized. And I think we can win over people there too. The rural America has gone Republican because they see the Democrats as urban. So it's this cultural thing. And what we need to do is say we got a program for rural reconstruction and the agriculture sector, and to bring manufacturing back to those states, particularly processing food and fiber off the farms. I mean, there are things we could do, and we have a positive program, which I think would appeal to people. Look at like Bernie Sanders' vote in the primary in West Virginia. He cleaned up against Hillary Clinton, as I recall, which is, West Virginia is seen as a hopeless state these days. So I'm just saying, I don't care where you live, there's things that can be done and you could have a positive impact, including protection of elections. But you're right, we got this right wing out there that's ready to get violent if it looks like Trump lost, or get violence to ensure that people are intimidated at the polls. It's a huge problem, and we need to address it. Each state is probably going to be a little different, but it's a real issue. Trey Woodford, Gaza is unquestionably genocide, and it's now being used as an excuse to willfully and maliciously conflate opposition with anti-Semitism, to gut the First Amendment and assault it with police brutality. I agree. That's what I was trying to say earlier. I think you said it there better and more concisely than I did, but I think that's where we're at. That's exactly the problem. And we've got to, defend our democratic rights and defend the right of people to be in solidarity with Palestinians and not be smeared as anti-Semites. Nikki Corden, angry, May 1st. On Wednesday, 6-week abortion ban took effect. And that is in which state? A lot of people who need them were unaware. Yeah, that's a problem too. And again, that's why even in Republican states where these things are happening, we need to be organized in making people aware of things like this. And, out there petitioning, there are a lot of people that are clueless. They're kind of turned off to politics. And you get it. If you feel hopeless, okay, Florida, yeah. If you feel hopeless, then it's almost painful to know what's going on when you feel powerless and you can't do anything about it. And so people just like avoid the whole thing, saying, I can't do anything about it, so it upsets me, so I'm not going to pay attention. Of course, that makes it worse. But that's, we got to understand why people feel that way. And that's why movements are so important, because people feel like, well, I'm not alone. And there's movement, maybe we can make a change. And another thing in strategizing, you want to define small victories that are achievable so you get a sense of momentum and that you can make a difference, including big differences over time. And that's why it's so important to organize everywhere and not just say, I'm in a red state, I can't do anything, and, just watch the world go by. I said red state again. I in the old terminology, maybe it was, I forget, it comes from an electro map on TV. Maybe it was 2000, but before that, a red state would be a socialist state. But anyway. Trey Woodford, Democrats will oppose fair elections with litigation rather than violence. Yeah, they're subtler in their voter suppression. That's true. And they've got a whole army of lawyers lined up to keep the Green Party off the ballot. In 2020, they didn't pay much attention to me, although their lawyers did get me knocked off in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Montana on specious grounds. But it wasn't a 50-state assault. They just tried to pick us off where it was easy or it was a battleground state like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. This year, I think it's going to be worse, and they're really going to go after Jill Stein and Kennedy, because they're not sure which way the Kennedy vote is swinging. The polls say he's taking more from Trump at the moment, but once more people understand what he really stands for, he's going to lose some support. But there's still going to be a lot of people who are generally progressive minded. They have a good vibe about the Kennedy's legacy, and they have no idea what Robert Kennedy Jr. stands for. And they're going to vote for him, even though it's voting against a lot of things they believe. So anyway, the Democrats are going after they're going after third parties and independent candidates, no doubt. And the right to vote for who you want is as important as the right to vote. If you have the right to vote, but you can't vote for who you want, it's not such a the right is not fully realized. So, access to the ballot in a reasonable manner should be a big issue of democratic rights. And you're right, the Democratic Party itself doesn't believe that. Certainly at the elite level, and I ran into some rank and file people today who also, they don't want competition from the left. They want us to say we have to vote for the Democrats because the Republicans are worse, which means the left disappears. The green alternative disappears. And we know from what Biden and the rest of the Democrats are doing, they're not providing solutions to the life or death issues that we face. Actually are. RCV doesn't matter until Project 2025 is stopped, Greens. Project 2025 is the Heritage Foundation blueprint for the next Trump administration. And it's frightening what they propose to do. They're ready to get rid of basically civil service protections, labor protections for federal employees, and fire people they don't find to be loyal and put their own stooges in there. Civil liberties, civil rights, the ability to, as the First Amendment puts, petition the government for redress, which, a demonstration is a form of that. All that is going to be threatened. The right to reproductive freedom, the tax system. I mean, they want to cut taxes for the rich even more, even though if you saw the New York Times yesterday, there's a good column by Gabriel Luckman. If I got his last name right. It's called "It's Time to Tax the Billionaires," and that's worth looking up because he has some charts in there, and you'll find that the billionaire class is now paying lower taxes than the bottom 50% of the population on average. Us who are working people are paying 24% of our income in taxes. The billionaires are paying 23%. That's not a progressive tax system. That's just using the tax system to further increase economic inequality. So these are all things in Project 25. But I disagree that RCV doesn't matter. We got to build that so you don't split the vote between the center and the left, and these Project 25 Republican crazies can get elected. And we're winning the RCV issue. We've gone from 2 jurisdictions in 2000 to about 24 jurisdictions in 2020 to now over 50 today. And it's on the ballot in at least 3 states and probably 2 more. The 3 states are 2 states, Oregon and Nevada, and probably also going to be on the ballot in Colorado, Idaho, and Washington, D.C. So we're winning that. So, I don't think it's right to drop that. We got to keep pushing that. It's an issue we're winning, and the more we win it, the more we open up the political system, and we end the problem where voting for what you really want, like the Greens, could create a situation where the Republican Trumpy wins. And that's why RCV is important, I believe. Scout Trooper 164. Apparently, Zoomers are going across the country to flip the states run by Republicans blue. Any thoughts on that? Zoomers, those are is that what you call Generation Z now? I'm a boomer and they're a Zoomer. If that's true, that's pretty cool, I think. If that's what they're doing, more power to them, because the fact that they're out there and they've got the energy to go to other states, and the interest is good. Now, I don't, the Democrats are no solution either. So, I'd like to see some Zoomers working, for the green alternative. And of course there are, but that's an ongoing debate. But the positive thing I see there is that they're active and not, throwing their hands up and saying, what can I do? I'm powerless, which they're really not. I mean, a lot of people feel that, but in movements, we can make a difference, and we have. Scout Trooper 164, what are your hopes for the Ukrainians? I personally think they'll deny Putin his political victory and last long enough to get those desperate assets they desire. I guess the desperate assets is their own land back. I think that's what you're probably referring to. Um, yeah, from what I know, and I've talked to a lot of Ukrainians over the last couple of years, um, they will keep fighting for their identity, their existence as Ukrainians. You know, in the occupied territories, the Russians say you got to take a Russian passport, start speaking Russian, deny your Ukrainian identity, or you might end up in jail or worse, you know, beat, tortured, sexually assaulted, or executed. That's what's going on. So the occupied territories are largely, to a great extent, depopulated, much lower population than they had before the invasion. And the Russians are importing, people from the Russian Federation. So it's a form of settler colonialism, and it's the same kind of thing Israel's doing in the Palestinian territories. And even Foreign Minister for Russia, Sergei Lavrov, said that in an interview at the end of last year, where he said what the Ukrainians, what the Israelis are doing in Gaza is what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. He called elimination of Hamas the same as denazification in Ukraine, and he called demilitarization as the equivalent of the destruction of Hamas militarily. And that was in Russian state media, domestically oriented media, but it was put in English in the foreign ministry website of Russia, and then put in RT International to be broadcast internationally. And, why did RT amplify that? Because I think really, Netanyahu and Putin are old buddies. When Netanyahu ran for re-election in 2019, the Likud party headquarters which is a multi-story building, they had a banner down the side of it. On one side, it was Netanyahu shaking Putin's hand. And on the other side, it was Netanyahu shaking Trump's hand. And the slogan was like something to the effect of Putin's important. Netanyahu's important because he talks to important people. So, they've been close. They cooperate, for example, when Israel wants to strike Iranian assets, military assets in Syria. Russia controls the military space, the airspace, on the western side of Syria. And, they have a deconfliction thing. Israel tells them, we're bringing a fighter jet in here to strike this target. Okay with that? You're not going to attack us? And the Russians say, nope, that's none of our business. And they let them do it. That's the kind of relationship that they have with each other. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I was just talking about, Russian imperialism in Ukraine is pretty brutal. It's like Israeli imperialism in Gaza. It's just the Gaza massacre is happening even at a faster rate. And the Israelis aren't trying to convert the Palestinians into, be Israeli Jews. They just want to push them out or have them just become second-class citizens and accept that quietly. The Russians want to wipe out Ukrainians if they don't want to become Russians. It's genocidal. You listen to the state media of Russia. This guy I was talking about it said he wanted to nuke Ukraine or Western countries. He has people on there saying that all the time about the Ukrainians. It's brutal. It's racist. It's disgusting. So my hopes for the Ukrainians are this year they can hold the front lines, and they can use the ATACMS they're getting and some cruise missiles from other countries to hit Russian military behind the front lines. And they can continue to push the Black Sea Fleet of Russia out of the Western Black Sea so they can export their grain. Um, and, hopefully create a situation where Putin decides he needs to cut his losses and will, you know, accept some kind of, the Ukrainians have a 10-point peace plan. I mean, if you read it, if you have read it, it's a lot of it's common sense, like secure the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So there isn't an accident there. All the way to Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian territory, and then reparations for what Russia did, and war crimes tribunals for the war crimes. Now, those last two things, Ukraine might say, okay, if we can get guarantees from other countries that we're going to be protected, and Russia withdraws, we'll drop the reparations demand and the war crimes trials. That could be a compromise, that they might accept. I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying, but they won't get to negotiate until the Ukrainians are to the point where the Russians conclude they can't beat the damn Ukrainians. They thought they could walk in there in a few days in 2022, and they got defeated on the way to Kyiv. And Ukraine's taken back about half the land that Russia originally seized. And then it's been kind of, frozen front lines for the last year. But it's costing Russia dearly. And, of course, it's costing Ukraine dearly. But that kind of defense may lead to the negotiating table and a solution that satisfies the Ukrainians, which is they want not just their land back, they want their people back, the people under occupation that are suffering so much. And, and the rights of ethnic minorities like the Crimean Tatars, who the Russians are treating terribly. And there's a whole history of that. I mean, Stalin deported the whole population from Crimea to the middle of Siberia. I mean, it was Tajikistan, one of those places, at the end of World War II. And that was not because his stated reason that the Crimean Tatars were traitors, and Nazi collaborators. That was crap. It's because they wanted to Russify Crimea as it does have a large Russian population, but most of that's related to military bases, and then secondarily to the tourism industry. So, that's my hope for Ukraine. They hold the line this year, and then Russia concludes we need to cut a deal and get the hell out of here because it's costing us too much. Okay, well, that's our hour, and I appreciate the questions. And I think the thing I come out of this discussion with is let's stay active and realize that when we're part of organized groups and building movements, we're going to feel better about our situation, and we're going to make a difference. And we've seen that, over and over again on issues. In my lifetime, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the Civil Rights movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and I could, go on down through the years, anti-apartheid movement and so forth. So, keep the faith, keep active, and we'll be back here next week, same time, same place, for another discussion. And got some guests coming. I don't have dates confirmed. Some are Green candidates. Some are other people with interesting thoughts on these different issues. So that's coming. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.